Hi, my name is Lisa Bain. Welcome to Treasure Talks. I would love for you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel, click the doorbell so you get notifications about new videos and all of our content. It has been such a joy to meet some incredible heroes over the years through my nonprofit work. Our community is filled with heroes who have such incredible and miraculous stories. These stories need to be heard. I am so excited to introduce you to some superheroes in our community and share their stories. These heroes are an example of serving, stepping outside of their comfort zone, and walking out a truly miraculous story. They found treasure in the darkest days of their life, and they are using it to help others and bring hope to those in our community. Welcome to Treasure Talks, where you are going to have an opportunity to hear stories firsthand, meet these amazing heroes, and be so inspired. Every month, we will spotlight a new story as you meet these community heroes and we chat one-on-one. So stay tuned and be ready for encouragement and inspiration by these community treasures. It's time for Treasure Talks. I am so excited for our Treasure Talks today and the amazing guest who is truly a beauty inside and out. She is my new friend, and I think the world of her, Sherry Sims. And I want to tell you a little bit about Sherry. She's the founder and CEO of Empowered Women of God International. And we're going to talk a little bit about that organization, which you will definitely want to find out more information on. You are a survivor of domestic violence and abuse. She uses her personal story to set women in abusive relationships free, to rehabilitate those who are incarcerated, breaking the silence of domestic abuse, and leading women to the cross where there's forgiveness and there's healing. You are the author of, do you have that little mini book?
Yeah.
Searching for Love, and we're going to hear more about this today. Sherry openly shares about her story as a runaway teenager and how that abuse started during that. And then also one thing we were sharing about that we have in common was our low self-esteem and how that led to so many things, but it also led to a miracle that saved your life. So welcome.
Thank you.
Your story is one of redemption, grace, love, and hope. And I would just love to take everyone back to the part where you ran away from home. And didn't that kind of start the whole journey into where we are now?
Absolutely, it really did. You know, I was 17 years old. I had just met someone at a church camp that was 6 years older than I. And I fell madly in love with him because he was older and he paid attention to me. And I was seeking that attention, and he seemed to fill that void. I had extremely low self-esteem, like you mentioned, and I was just searching. And so when that relationship started at church camp, we both ended up going back to our homes respectively in opposite states, but we stayed in touch. And for the next 4 months, we had this long distance relationship that was before cell phones and text messaging. So we had to do it the old fashioned way and the long distance phone calls and the letters by mail. And during that time, of course, my father just absolutely abhorred this relationship. He did not want me to be dating anyone for that matter, let alone someone 6 years older than me in another state. And so he was against the relationship from the beginning and did everything he could to talk me out of it and try to dissuade me. But of course, I was in love and I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. And I remember one night, very, very late, I was on the telephone, the only telephone we had in our entire house. Back then, if you had a 10-foot cord, it could go into any room.
Long cord.
And I remember with no call waiting and paper-thin walls, and we're in a 720-square-foot house, I'm sitting there having this long conversation late at night, and my father had just had all he could take. And so I remember he went in the middle of this phone call. I'm in this very intense discussion, and he unplugged the phone cord from outside my door, which of course disconnected our call, and he announced very loudly, "You are not talking to him anymore." And so because of that, and being a rebellious teenager at that point at 17, I just said, that's it. So I did what any self-respecting teenager would do. I ran away from home.
I mean,
And
you really
I
did.
did.
You didn't like just go to the corner and then
No.
end up coming back. Wow.
No, he came and picked me up. I was actually working my little part-time job at the time. It was an evening shift, and he picked me up 2 days after Christmas and took me across the border. And I was in Fort Worth, Texas within hours, and the rest is history. I refused to come home. My father insisted, and I wouldn't get on the plane that he had already pre-purchased a plane ticket for. And I defied him for the first time in my life.
Wow.
And so he took it upon himself and he said, okay, I'm just going to go get her. So he got in the car and he came to get me the following day. And he shows up at my boyfriend, soon to be husband, because in my mind, we had to get married. There was no way that I was going to be with him until we were married. And that, coming from a Christian home, that was just my whole, perspective. And I had made it very clear to him. And when he showed up, my father was just devastated. And he kept asking me and pleading with me, please come home. And I wouldn't go. So I thought, well, we're 250 miles apart. How is he ever going to convince me to come home? And I adamantly stayed. And my parents were praying parents. We came from a Christian home. So my father, on his way out of town to go back home, since I wouldn't come home with him, he stopped and called a friend of his that was a minister. And he told him the situation, and he proceeded to pray for me at that time. And I didn't know anything about this phone call until many, many years later. But I was told that he prayed because I had a similar experience to someone in the Bible that was the prodigal son. I had run away from home, and I was living my own life, and I was refusing to live the way I was raised in a godly life, and I was intending on doing my own thing. As a result, he prayed that I would be protected in the meantime, but that at one point I would come to myself and come home. And
how long did he have to pray, and how did that end up?
It took 6 years.
Wow, you were in this marriage.
I was in the marriage for 2 years, and it started out just being verbally abusive, then emotionally abusive, and then eventually physically abusive. And so by the time I had been married at 17, had a daughter by the time I was 18, and I was divorced by the time I was 19.
Wow.
And I was still had that same cycle repeating, though. I was drawing, because of the insecurity, I was drawing those abusive relationships to me.
Yes.
And through dating and so forth. And I was determined I was going to find Mr. Right. So I had no qualms in going to the nightclubs 7 nights a week. I'd put my daughter in a 24-hour daycare, and I was just searching for Mr. Right. And eventually I found him. Unfortunately, he wasn't Mr. Right. He turned out to be Mr. Wrong. But we got together. We ended up living together for 2 years before we got married. And during that 2-year time period, the abuse started, and it was physical, and it was very, very bad. So destructive that the police were eventually called at one point, and the police officer came to the door. And my husband at the time was in the parking lot in handcuffs. And he came to the door to check on me to make sure that I was okay. And I was bruised and bleeding, and answered that door. And he looked at me and asked if I was okay. And I told him I would be fine. I had a 5-year-old daughter by that point clinging to my legs, crying, and could not understand what was going on. And he looked at me, and that police officer gave me a card, a business card that was from Domestic Violence Intervention Services. And I found out later that that was not a requirement of their position, that they were not even told to do that.
Wow.
But fortunately, he had been given some cards and had them available. And when he heard my situation and saw the aftermath, he immediately gave me one and told me that I needed to call them and get a restraining order, because the next time he could potentially kill me. And it just resonated with me, but of course I was still afraid, and I didn't want to call the police. I was not the one that called the police to begin with. The neighbors had.
Really?
Because they heard everything and saw what was going on. So when he asked me to do that, I took the card and thanked him. But I told him I'm not pressing charges because I'm afraid of what might happen when he gets out. He would find me. And I knew that the next time he would kill me.
Oh, Sherry.
So we ended up kind of spending time away from each other overnight. The next morning he comes back and he's sobering up by this point. And as usual, which was always happening, he would always say, I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. Forgive me. I won't do it ever again. And it was so repetitive. And I'd had this for over 2 years. And I finally just said, you know, this isn't going to work. For once, the very first time, he said, I'll do anything you want. What do you want me to do? And he had never spoken those words before. And the first thing that came to mind, we need to go to church. I felt like that was the only answer. That was what I was raised in. I felt peace there. I felt comfort there. I knew that God had the answer and that somehow he might be able to hold our marriage together. And he agreed to go, which was so uncharacteristic of him to ever say yes to anything, especially that. But we ended up going to church the very night he had come home, and it was a Sunday evening. And we went to church and ended up sitting in the balcony because the church was packed. Well, once we got there, I didn't know again until many years later the correlation between that prayer that took place 6 years earlier. And now I'm in church with my second abusive husband. And the minister that was speaking that night was the same man that prayed for me 6 years earlier. And right in the middle of his message, he stops and he said, I don't know why I'm saying this. I've never done this before. But for some reason, I feel God is telling me there's someone here tonight that is coming as a last-ditch effort to hold your life together. And you're in a dangerous place. And I am supposed to ask you to make a choice because you're not promised tomorrow, and you need to make a decision as to whether you're going to follow God or not. And if you're here, I want to pray with you because this is a life and death situation. And I just want you to raise your hand. Well, there were easily over 2,000 to 3,000 people in that building, and not a single person raised their hand. And I knew it was me that he was talking to. He basically read my mail. He told everything that I was going through and why I was there. I knew God was speaking through him to me to let me know he knew. And when he made that invitation, he kept asking and kept asking. This was not once, but probably 2 to 3 times. And finally he said, all right, we're just going to do this and take care of it this way. We're all going to pray. So he led everyone in the salvation prayer, recommitting their life to the Lord, and which I did. And I prayed that, just repeating after him those words of just asking God to forgive me and to take control of my life, and how much I needed forgiveness, and I was so, so sorry. And I loved him so much, and I wanted him to be Lord of my life. Even though I'd been saved at 8 years old and had made that decision, I really didn't know what I was doing then. But now that I'm 23 and been through all I've been through, I knew. And so my life completely changed at that moment. I felt everything lift off of my shoulders, the pressure, the fear, the anxiety, the insecurity, everything was gone. And what was so exciting to me was that I heard my husband praying the prayer along with me. So thinking, we're going to be fine. Everything's going to be great. He's committed his life to the Lord too, which was just a miracle. And we walk out of the building, and before my foot could even hit the pavement, he looked at me and he said, I don't know what all that was about, but I don't want any part of it. If you want this God thing in church, that's fine, but that's not for me. And I was so shocked. And I remember just looking at him saying, but you don't understand. We just prayed. I heard you. And he said, all I did was repeat after that man what he said. I knew I needed to make a decision. And that's when I did.
Wow.
And the next day, I ended up leaving and eventually went back to him because of loneliness.
Yeah.
And that's when I got the beating of my life. And I was just inches from death.
Oh.
And my daughter was with me at the time, dramatically impacted her life again. And I knew at that point, this has got to be the end. That's when I made the call. That's when I called Divis, and they helped me get through the restraining order process and everything so that I could file for divorce and get the restraining order. And that's what took place at that point. And everything, the cycle broke, and no longer, I said, that's it, no more.
Thank God for praying parents.
Yes.
And, you know, so many similarities. Thank God for praying parents. And so the thing I just so love about your story is that you've taken this pain, and that's really what's formed this nonprofit that you're involved in now. You're the CEO and the founder. Can you explain what number one, the mission of this nonprofit is, and how that came to be?
Well, it is probably the most unimaginable thing that you can even think of, because of the fact that I am not someone that you would typically see and say, she's got a prison ministry. No, that would not be the case.
I love that, though.
It all turned out just someone had asked me, part of an organization that I would speak for, and would go and share my story at their luncheons and dinners and coffees. And it's an international ministry for women. And they asked me if I would stay over one day and give my same story to some women in a correctional facility. And I remember thinking, a prison, excuse me, I have no idea what that's like. All I know is what's on the news and in movies, and that was not the place I really felt comfortable.
Talking about being outside of your comfort zone.
That was completely out of my comfort zone. But I told him, I gave him my word that I would do it, and I went, and there were 29 women all in jumpsuits, and I ended up sitting 6 feet from an armed guard in a courtroom setting, and I'm open my mouth and start sharing my story. And within 2 minutes, I noticed every single one of the women were sitting on the edge of their seat with their mouths hanging open. And I was shocked because the response to my story was so embraced that we had record of 16 out of 29 of those women received Christ when I completed my story and prayed with them.
That's amazing.
And when that happened, it put me on a completely new path in my journey. I wasn't even aware that there was an issue with incarcerated women until that day. And on the way home, I began to pray, and God began to show me how I needed to do what was next. And we put that particular talk, my story, into a mini book, which is what you've already shared.
Which I love. I've read. It's wonderful.
Yeah, Searching for Love. And we give that. We actually started that. First speaking engagement was in 2015. By 2018, in January of 2018, we had established our nonprofit. We had our website, our 501c3. Everything was, all the groundwork was laid. And we ended up printing and designing and editing the book and getting it ready for distribution. December of 2017, January of 2018, we distributed copies of the book in 2 facilities in Oklahoma. The reason being we decided to put it in the incarceration area is because of the fact that female inmates, over 94%, have experienced domestic violence in their adult life, not just in their environment growing up, but they've personally experienced it, which is why they related so much to my story.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the story leads them right into salvation, because I believe God is the only answer, and through Jesus is the only way that they can ever have peace and their self-esteem in Him.
Right.
So that was the whole purpose. God told me, if you will put your story into a book, it will go places you'll never be able to go. And especially we've seen that through COVID, because everything was shut down.
Yeah.
And if we had not had our materials in the prison system already, they would not have had the Christian literature and the faith-based materials that we provide.
And we were talking, your goal is to be able by the end of this year to have 100,000 copies, really nationwide in 130 facilities?
Yes.
which is national, which is huge. And, you know, when I was thinking about the women that are incarcerated and just that lack of hope and even the suicide rate and so many affected by domestic violence, what an avenue of hope for these women. Have you seen some of the results of how this is? Oh, do tell.
Well, salvations happen, of course, every time we get a response from the books, and that's what started it. Now, once they started responding, then I had a burden to mentor them. I wanted to disciple them. I didn't want to just be content with the fact,
there. Right?
Because you know, if things don't start changing from the inside out, they're just going to end up right back in the same circumstances once they're released. Because 85% of them will be released, and once they are released, the recidivism rate, of course, is huge. I mean, a third of them will end up back in prison within 6 months, 2/3 within 5 years. So it's like we only have a window to mentor them and change them from the inside out by renewing their mind. And we have faith-based curriculum that we provide them through a correspondence course. So once we hear from them, we then send them an introduction. We ask them if they want to participate and enroll. And then we start sending them one lesson at a time. And as they complete a lesson, they send a reply page back, and then we send them the next lesson. And we do everything. We pay all the postage on everything. We provide all the materials. And so what's happening is salvation, of course, right from the beginning, because we address that even in our curriculum. And so even if they've never seen a copy of the book, but they are referred by other inmates, which is what's happening now. We see inmates referring other inmates to the point that our first graduate that we had referred 62 inmates by herself.
Oh my goodness.
And the largest amount has been 71 inmates so far. And now we're seeing such a dramatic increase just since the first of this year. Last year, we had 430 total referrals. This year alone, already within 10 weeks, we've seen 300. So we know we're on just a dramatic increase.
And with COVID, don't you think that has kind of caused things to just kind of explode and with, you know, even incarcerations and things. So how can, if someone is out there that really is wanting to get a hold of this and this curriculum, or they've got a daughter or that needs this, what's the best way to get this book and to get this curriculum?
Well, the curriculum right now is only being offered to inmates. And so we have that available to them just because of the logistics of it. We have to kind of have some level of strategy behind it. The curriculum is available also in a book by the woman that wrote it, which is out of Texas, and it's available on her website.
Which we'll have, what's her name?
Her name is Cindy Nethery.
And we'll have all of this online, so if you guys want any of this information, we'll have all of this.
Yes, and her book is fantastic, and she was the one that gave us permission to use this and has written additional lessons just for our use. But we also have the book available as a digital download for anyone that would like to have a copy. Go to our website, ask for the book, or it'll do a pop-up window, and it'll give you the ability to be able to give us your email so that we can send you the ebook, and you're welcome to download that and have a copy for yourself. But we are definitely, we want to be able to distribute these, not just in the prison system, but eventually we know that there's such an even bigger need outside the prison system right now, because there's women that are, the only difference is one's behind bars and one is not.
Exactly. And if you can reach them before they end up going there, because that, you know, really relating with the whole victim of abuse, you're isolated, you're trapped. And you usually go from the frying pan to the frying pan. That just all stems from that low self-esteem. You know, you have such a serving heart. And how has it been healing for you? You know, even on this journey, I know in my own journey, there's days where some of those things just kind of come back and the enemy tries to get you. But I tell you, isn't there power in just serving and being transparent, sharing your story? How have you found that that's really helped you?
Every time I get a letter back from an inmate and she starts to express and, you know, how much she appreciates these lessons, and how much he appreciates the fact that we care.
Yeah.
Because in most cases, they've been disowned.
Yeah.
They've been written off by their family and their loved ones. In a lot of cases, their parental rights are taken away from them because they're incarcerated. So they've lost the right to their children. Their children are being adopted by other parents now. And they are not just separated from their family, but they're completely just ignored by their family and abandoned by their family. So when they tell us thank you, they really mean it. Because if we weren't extending that, loving letter and encouragement and affirmations and scriptures and talking to them about how much God loves them, there would be no one.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing that they appreciate the most. So that's what it is, I think, the reward that I feel for being transparent about my life and about what I've been through. Because, in Revelations 12:11 says, we overcome him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. So every time I have an opportunity to share my testimony, I am doing one more thing against the enemy that came against me to try to eliminate my life.
What the enemy meant for evil, God restored for good.
Absolutely.
You are a walking ball of hope and light. And truly, you inspire me. And if there's just, as we end today, one of the things that I love that you said is, God never wastes a hurt. Every part of your story, no matter how dark that it was, brought you to this day. And some people that are watching today may be incarcerated or on their way. In that dark place, God has the bright piece of the puzzle, and it just all fits together so beautifully. And if there's one thing that you could say to someone that's about to let go, that's about to give up, that's in that place of isolation and abuse, what would you say to someone just to kind of give them a little bit of hope?
Like you mentioned, God can take even our worst mistakes and our worst decisions, and he can transform our lives. He can use those. He doesn't waste a thing. And sometimes, and I've been there, so I understand what it's like to feel like you're a complete and total failure. But I honestly know that if you can come to God and just be honest, transparent, he knows everything anyway, so you're not holding anything back. You just need to be honest with him and just say, Father, my life is such a mess. And I don't know if you can use any of it, but whatever I have, I give completely to you. And I ask you to do something with it if you can. And I promise you, he will. He made every single one of us in mind for a purpose. He didn't just create a purpose once you were born. He made you specifically for something that he wanted to do in this earth to help other people and to be his light in this world. So there's something that you have that you're designed to do. And so he has never given up on you because he knew exactly the track your life would be on.
My mom used to always say, everybody has a purpose until their very last breath.
Yeah.
When you were talking, it reminds me of this little piece of pottery that I have on my dining room table, and it's called kintsugi art, and it's a Japanese form of art where they have a whole piece and they break it and they fill it with silver, gold, or platinum, and the broken one is more valuable than the one that's not. And it just reminds me so much of those broken places. No matter how broken you are, God just fills those with gold. And we are a container for his glory. And I just think of you are just amazing, just testimony. And no matter how broken you are, God is always going to use you, and there's a purpose, and to hang on. And what a message of restoration and hope. And I'm just inspired by you. And would you end us in prayer and pray for those out there who are just maybe needing a hope or maybe walking through that abuse? Could you just end us out in prayer?
Well, Father, I just thank you so much for this opportunity to connect with your children, your precious children. Lord, you love them so much. You desire so many great things for them. You have such an amazing plan for their life. And the enemy has tried to convince them otherwise. But Lord, I know that we're here today to encourage them, to give them hope where there's been no hope, that there's a future where they've thought they had no future. But Father, right now, I know according to Jeremiah 29:11, that your thoughts towards them are for good and not for evil, to give them a beautiful future full of hope. And Lord, you want them to have a peaceful, loving life, not a life of abuse or neglect or abandonment or rejection. But Father, you'll come in and you'll heal every wound. And it will be as if it were a story that they read somewhere, but it will not hurt anymore, but it will be a testimony that they can share. And Lord, I just thank you for this opportunity to be your voice, because I believe you're reaching them and telling them that they're precious, they're important, and their life is valuable. And in Jesus' name I pray this. Amen.
Amen. I am so grateful and honored that you were here. You are such a blessing. And again, we're going to leave all of the links and all of the book information for you to get any of this information from Sherry. And you are easily accessible, and your website, it's phenomenal. Please go check it out. It is, I am so behind this mission and love it so much. And don't forget to like us on YouTube. Go to lisabain.com and stay in touch with us, because we've got Treasure Talks every month. Amazing people like Sherry. And have a great day. And we will see you again on Treasure Talks. Thank you for joining us at Treasure Talks. And don't forget to go and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can make sure to get the newest content and videos. And visit our website, lisabain.com.